Yuna stood before the heavy, polished door. It was made from a dark wood from a world she had never visited. Her reflection in the metal nameplate was distorted. She could see the faint, elegant pattern of her scales along her temples, catching the station's artificial light. She took a slow breath, straightening the high collar of her formal coat. Felt tight. Everything about her clothes felt designed to hold her in a specific shape. A respectable shape. A draconian shape. She pressed the call button. A soft chime sounded inside. The door slid open without a sound. The room beyond was quiet and warm, a sharp contrast to the cool, noisy corridor of the space station. It looked like a calm office from old Earth. There was a real wooden desk, shelves with actual paper books, and a single living plant in the corner. A man sat behind the desk. He looked human, with kind eyes and a tired face. A small sign on his desk read, "Mr. Park, manager." "Miss Yuna," Mr. Park said. He did not stand up or bow too low. He simply nodded and gestured to the chair opposite him. "Please sit. Would you like some tea?" "Thank you, no," Yuna said. Her voice was calm, the perfect tone she had practiced. She sat, folding her hands in her lap. The chair was comfortable, made for many different kinds of bodies. "I have reviewed your initial inquiry," Mr. Park said, looking at a screen set into his desk. "The Celadone Agency provides discreet, professional companionship services, cultural bridging, event attendance, social facilitation. We are not a matchmaking service. We are not a security firm." "I understand," Yuna said. "My needs are simple." Mr. Park looked at her. His gaze was careful, not staring at her scales or her eyes. He was looking at her. "Clients who say their needs are simple," he said gently, "often have the most complex situations. May I ask the nature of the events?" "Family gatherings," Yuna said, the words practiced. "A gallery opening. A charity dinner. A small wedding anniversary. My family is prominent in our community. My attendance is required. Solo attendance is..." She searched for the right word. "It draws more attention than I prefer." "Questions. Concerns." "Concerns," Mr. Park prompted. "That I am too reclusive, too focused on my private studies. That I lack social aptitude." The words tasted bitter. "A partner, seen with me at these events, ends the speculation. It is a practical solution. A temporary one. A business arrangement," Mr. Park said. "Exactly. A simple bargain. I require someone who can be present, polite, and unobtrusive. They must follow basic draconian etiquette for public events. They must not be intimidated by my people. They must not ask personal questions." She paused. "The fee. I am prepared to pay the standard rate, plus a 20% discretion bonus." It was a large sum. Mr. Park did not react to the number. He leaned back in his chair. "You wish to rent a shield. A very polite, well-dressed shield." Yuna felt a flicker of shame. "Is that not what your service provides?" "We provide partners," Mr. Park corrected softly. "A shield is an object. A partner, even a temporary paid one, is a person. The difference matters. A bad partner, even a silent one, can be felt by everyone in the room. It can make the loneliness worse." The word loneliness hung in the air. Yuna did not flinch, but she felt it hit her like a small, cold stone in her stomach. He had seen it. Of course he had seen it. "I am not lonely," she stated, her voice firmer. "I am pragmatic." Mr. Park nodded, accepting the lie without challenge. He turned back to his screen. "The profile you submitted asks for a human. Any specific reason? Other species are often more visually striking for such a role, or more physically imposing. Humans are common," Yuna said. "They are unremarkable in the galactic commons. Their expressions are easier for me to read than some, and they tend to be adaptable." She did not say the other reason, that the gentle, rounded features of a human held no expectations of draconian majesty. They would not try to compete with her for height or presence. They would simply be next to her. "I see." Mr. Park scrolled. We have several humans on roster with cross-cultural event experience. Diplomatic Corps retirees, professional escorts. No, Yuna interrupted. Not a professional socialite. Someone quieter. Mr. Park glanced at her. He scrolled further. His finger stopped. He studied a profile for a long moment. Min Su, he said finally. Yuna waited. Former geological survey specialist. Independent contractor. Spent years on solo and small team deep survey missions for Astral Geotech. His contracts have lapsed. He is currently available for medium-term engagements. Mr. Park looked up. His evaluations note he is reliable, calm under pressure, and has a high tolerance for isolation. One supervisor wrote, exceptional listener, comfortable with silence. That last phrase resonated in Yuna's mind. Comfortable with silence. Her family's events were full of loud talk, subtle boasts, and layered meanings. A silent presence beside her sounded like a relief. Does he have any event experience? She asked. None listed, Mr. Park said. But he has basic etiquette training from his corp days for client interactions. He will know how to dress and how not to cause offense. He paused. He is not a shield, Miss Yuna. He is a person who knows what it is like to be alone in a crowd. That sometimes is more useful than knowing which fork to use. Yuna looked at the distorted reflection of herself in the desk surface. A lonely dragon girl paying for a human to stand beside her. It was pathetic. It was also her only idea. Set up the meeting, she said. I will approve him if he is suitable. Mr. Park entered the command. The first meeting is set for tomorrow, in the station's central garden, Quadrant 3, neutral public ground. The standard probationary period applies. The contract begins upon your verbal confirmation after that meeting. Yuna stood up. Thank you, Mr. Park. He stood this time and gave a small, respectful bow. Good luck, Miss Yuna. I hope you find what you are looking for. Yuna turned and left the quiet, warm office for the sterile station hallway. She wasn't looking for anything, she told herself. She was buying a service, a simple bargain, nothing more. But as she walked, the tight collar of her coat seemed to squeeze a little less. The first step, however embarrassing, was done. Min Su stared at the message on his terminal. It glowed in the dim light of his small living module. The room was neat, bare, and temporary. A single bag held all his personal items. He read the contract summary again. Asterisk client, Draconian diaspora, female. Requirement, social partner for 4 public events over 3-4 standard weeks. Purpose, non-romantic, cultural accompaniment. Meeting, tomorrow, 1400 hours station time, Central Garden. Quadrant 3, the Moss Grotto. Probationary. Asterisk the payment amount was listed. It was good, very good. More than he made in 2 months of survey work. It would cover his sister Hannah's next pilot certification fee with plenty left over to live on while he looked for more substantial work. He felt a low hum of anxiety. Social partner. Events. He was good with rocks, with silent landscapes, with the hum of a survey scanner. People, especially at fancy events, were a different kind of geology. One he had never quite mapped. His personal comm chimed. He knew who it was before he answered. Hannah's face filled the screen, her hair tied back, the cockpit of her cargo shuttle visible behind her. Appa, she said, her voice cheerful but her eyes sharp. You've been quiet. Did you get another deep survey gig? Please tell me it's not another 6 months staring at silicon deposits on some airless rock. Min Su managed a small smile. No. Nothing like that. It's a short-term contract. Planet side. Well, orbital plate side. Only a few weeks. Hannah's expression shifted to relief, then curiosity. Doing what? You're not exactly a people person. It's a cultural liaison job, he said, using the agency's term. For a draconian client. Just attending some events with them. Easy work. Hannah was silent for a moment. Her eyebrows rose. A liaison? You? Min Su, the last event you attended was my graduation. and you stood by the refreshment table the whole time talking about the mineral content in the building's support beams. It was interesting limestone, he defended, his smile becoming more real. This is different. It's a job. A simple one. Stand there. Be polite. Don't spill anything. She studied his face. He knew she could see the uncertainty he was trying to hide. Just be careful, okay? Draconians. They have a reputation. Proud. Formal. Don't get caught up in anything complicated. It's a business transaction, Hannah. Simple. I get paid to be a quiet presence. A paid friend, she said, not unkindly. A paid partner, he corrected. There's a difference. After the call ended, the module felt quieter. Min-Soo looked at his one good suit, hanging in a protective bag. He would need to get it cleaned. He thought about Draconians. He had seen them on stations before. Tall, elegant, moving with a natural grace that made others step aside. They were like features in a landscape, beautiful, imposing, and often distant. He felt no fear, only a sort of respectful curiosity. What kind of Draconian needed to pay for a partner? The central garden was a bubble of manufactured life in the heart of the station. The air here was moist and smelled of soil and green things. Min-Soo arrived early. He always did. He found Quadrant 3, the Moss Grotto. It was a quieter section, with soft light filtering through a dome above, illuminating banks of different mosses and ferns from a dozen worlds. He stood near a particularly vibrant patch of blue-green moss, his hands clasped behind his back, watching tiny insects burrow through it. He did not turn when he heard the footsteps. They were measured, firm. He waited until they stopped a polite distance away. Then he turned. She was taller than him, dressed in a severe but beautiful gray outfit that seemed both modern and ancient. The subtle patterns on her skin, like mother of pearl, traced her cheekbones and the backs of her hands. Her eyes were a striking gold, the pupils vertical slits. She regarded him with a cool, appraising look, the look of someone inspecting a tool. Min-Soo. Her voice was clear, melodic, but carefully flat. He gave a short, respectful bow, the one Mr. Park had reminded him of. Not too deep, not too shallow. Miss Yuna. It is good to meet you. There was a pause. She seemed to be waiting for something else. Nervousness, awe, clumsy flattery. He simply waited, his expression calm and open. You have reviewed the terms? She asked. Yes. For events over 3 weeks. Basic etiquette. Discretion required. Good. She glanced around the grotto, as if checking for observers. Your role is to be present. You will stand near me. You will speak when spoken to, and your answers should be brief and neutral. You are there as background. I understand. Another silence stretched out. It was not entirely uncomfortable for Min-Soo. He had spent years with only the silence of empty worlds for company. This was a more complicated silence, full of her unspoken expectations and his own quiet observation. He saw the way her fingers tightened slightly on the small bag she carried. He saw the tension in her neck, held so proudly to fill the space. He gestured lightly to the moss bank beside them. This variety is interesting. Brian Prime Xenophilia. It's not really a moss. It's a symbiotic cluster of a fungal network and a photosynthetic microorganism from Proxima b. The blue hue is a radiation shield. Very resilient. Yuna blinked. Her gaze snapped from him to the moss. She had expected many possible first remarks from a human. A comment on her appearance on the station, on the weather. Not a botanical fact about decorative station moss. You know this? The careful flatness in her voice cracked, just a little, with surprise. I spent a lot of time on rocks with similar non-standard biota. You learn to notice the small things that grow in hard places. He said it simply, without pride. Yuna looked from the moss back to him. The appraisal in her golden eyes softened, just a fraction, into something more like curiosity. The tool, it seemed, had an unexpected feature. I see, she said. The words were less icy. The first event is the gallery opening in 2 days. I will send you the details, dress code, and a brief on the guests of note. Be ready at 1900 hours. I will be. Minsu nodded. She gave one last, lingering look, a mix of doubt and dawning interest. Then, with a slight, almost imperceptible tilt of her head that might have been the beginning of a nod, she turned and walked away, her footsteps fading on the garden path. Minsu let out a slow breath. He looked back at the blue-green moss. It was a survivor, thriving under artificial light in a metal shell. He understood that. The meeting, he decided, had gone as well as it could have. He had a job, a simple bargain. He would be a quiet, observant presence. For her and for Hannah's tuition. It was enough. For now. The gallery was a symphony of noise. Not loud noise, but the dense, buzzing hum of polite conversation, clinking glasses, and soft footsteps on polished stone. The air smelled of expensive perfume and the ozone of holographic displays. Light glittered off floating art pieces and the jewels of the guests. Yuna moved through the crowd like a ship through calm water. People parted for her, offering respectful nods and murmured greetings. She acknowledged them with the barest tilt of her chin, her face a mask of serene, distant politeness. Minsu walked a half-step behind and to her left, as instructed. He wore his simple, dark suit. He felt plain, like a shadow next to her gleaming presence. But he was comfortable being a shadow. It let him watch. He watched Yuna most of all. He saw how her smiles never reached her eyes. He saw the minute tightening of her jaw when a particularly fawning art collector bowed too low. He saw how her gaze slid over the crowd, never resting, never engaging. She was performing, and she was deeply, profoundly bored. Yuna, my dear, how radiant you look. An older draconian male approached, his scales a more pronounced bronze. 2 others flanked him. And you've brought a companion. How modern. Yuna's posture became even straighter. Uncle, this is Minsu. He is providing cultural liaison during his stay. Her tone made it sound like a minor, tedious fact. The uncle's eyes, a paler gold, swept over Minsu with mild curiosity, like looking at a moderately interesting insect. Human. Bold choice. I hope he appreciates the art. So often their senses are a bit blunt. Minsu felt the jab. It was not meant for him, not really. It was a needle aimed at Yuna, testing her choice. He saw a flicker of irritation in her eyes. She opened her mouth, likely to deliver a cool, cutting defense. Before she could speak, Minsu followed his instructions. He was spoken to. He could give a brief, neutral answer. He looked past the uncle at the large holographic sculpture they were standing near. It was a swirling vortex of metallic colors and shifting mathematical forms. It is a striking piece, Minsu said, his voice calm and even. The uncle's gaze snapped to him, surprised he had spoken. The use of the Mobius algorithm for the internal light refraction is clever. But it's the substrate that's interesting. It's not a standard holographic matrix. It's using a colloidal suspension of actual metallic particles, probably iron and copper, held in a magnetic field. That's why the light has that granular, textured quality. It gives it weight. A lot of art like this feels like light and air. This one feels like it has a core. The silence that followed was absolute. Yuna's uncle stared, his mouth slightly open. The 2 draconians with him looked from Minsu to the sculpture as if seeing it for the first time. Yuna was utterly still. Her eyes were wide, fixed on Minsu's profile. The uncle blinked, his arrogant expression faltering. Yes, the artist is known for her material innovations. His voice had lost its condescending edge. It was now merely conversational and slightly confused. Minsu nodded, as if they were just 2 people discussing technical details. It shows. The magnetic field strength must be perfectly calibrated. A delicate balance. Like most good things. He then fell silent, his piece said. He returned his gaze to a neutral point ahead, his job done. He had not defended himself. He had not defended Yuna. He had simply talked about the work in front of them, from a perspective they had not considered. The uncle cleared his throat, suddenly awkward. Well, yes. Enjoy the exhibition, Yuna. He gave a curt nod and moved away with his companions, already whispering among themselves. Yuna did not move for a full 10 seconds. Then, very slowly, she turned her head to look at Min-Su. The mask was gone. In its place was pure, unguarded bewilderment. How did you know that? Min-Su kept his voice low. The color refraction was wrong for pure light. It had a scattering pattern. I saw a similar system used on a mining outpost to separate ore dust in zero-G. It's practical technology, repurposed. He glanced at her. Was that unsuitable? I spoke when spoken to. I tried to be neutral. A strange sound escaped Yuna. It was a short, choked breath that was almost a laugh. She quickly schooled her features back to neutrality, but the gold of her eyes was warmer, alive with surprise. No, it was suitable. They continued their circuit of the gallery. The encounter changed the atmosphere around them. The glances from other Draconians were no longer just curious or dismissive of the human. They were now curious about this human, the one who had left Yuna's knowledgeable uncle momentarily speechless. Yuna's own performance eased. The tension in her shoulders softened a fraction. She didn't have to be solely on the defensive. Later, as they stood before a painting of a stellar nebula, a soft, synthesized chime announced the artist's speech. The crowd began to drift towards a central platform. Yuna leaned slightly towards Min-Su, her voice a whisper only he could hear. The magnetic field. You said it was a delicate balance. Yes. Difficult to maintain? Very. Any instability and the whole suspension collapses. It falls into chaos. She was quiet for a moment, watching the crowd gather. I see, she said, and the words held a new weight. For the rest of the evening, she did not tell him to just be background. Sometimes, she would pause before a piece and glance at him, a silent question in her eyes. He would sometimes offer a quiet, factual observation. That polymer is grown, not printed, or the soundscape uses the infrafrequency vibrations of a red giant star. And she would listen, her head tilted, as if he were translating a secret language hidden in the art. The bargain was in effect. He was her partner for the event. But as they left the gallery, the quiet between them was no longer just the silence of a business arrangement. It was the silence of two people who had just discovered, quite unexpectedly, that the other could see the hidden structures in the world. It was a more interesting silence. The contract stipulated shared meals. It was, Mr. Park had explained, for cultural acclimatization and rapport building. To Yuna, it felt like an awkward, forced obligation. To Min-Su, it was just another part of the job. Though quieter than the gallery, Yuna's apartment was spacious and beautiful. It had high ceilings and a vast window looking out onto the glittering orbital plate city. It was also extremely neat and felt a little empty, like a museum exhibit. The dining table was a long slab of dark stone. Their first dinner was stiff. A food delivery drone brought containers of exquisite-looking dishes. They sat across from each other. The only sounds were the clink of utensils and the distant hum of the city. The food is acceptable? Yuna asked, her formal tone returning in the privacy of her home. It's very good, Min-Su said. The spices are complex. Silence returned. Yuna seemed to be searching for another topic from a list of acceptable ones. The gallery was satisfactory. Your comments were not disruptive.
I'm glad.
More silence. Min-Su ate slowly, looking out the window. He wasn't bothered by the quiet, but he could feel Yuna's discomfort radiating across the table. She was used to being alone, but not, he guessed, to sharing her silence with someone else. The second dinner was the same. The third, Min-Su took a small risk. As they finished eating, he pulled a small, personal player from his pocket. It was an old device, its edges worn smooth. Do you mind? He asked. I sometimes listen to music after meals. Yuna looked startled, then nodded permission. Of course. He placed the player on the table and tapped it. The room filled with soft, ambient sound. It was not music with a melody, but layers of deep, resonant tones, the gentle crackle of static and faint, echoing chimes. It sounded like wind over a canyon or the deep, slow heartbeat of a planet. Yuna froze, a utensil hovering above her plate. She listened, her head cocked. What is this? It's from my survey days, Minsu said, his voice softer. It's a soundscape. I recorded the magnetic resonance vibrations of a ringed gas giant, layered with the ultrasonic pulses of a crystalline life form we found on its third moon. Slowed down. A lot. To something we can hear. She stared at him, then at the little player. You listen to this for enjoyment? It's familiar, he said simply. It reminds me of quiet places. He saw her shoulders relax, just a little. She did not ask him to turn it off. They finished the meal with the strange, beautiful sounds filling the empty spaces between them. A few days later, Minsu arrived for dinner early. Yuna was on a call in another room. He waited on her large balcony, which held a few sleek, decorative planters. Most held artificial plants that never changed. But one in a corner held a real, living plant. It was a sorry-looking thing. Its leaves were drooping, tinged with yellow at the edges. The soil was dry and cracked. Minsu crouched down beside it. He touched the soil. He gently lifted a leaf and examined its underside. He looked at the position of the planter relative to the large window and the schedule of the artificial daylight cycle. When Yuna found him there, he was still crouched, frowning thoughtfully at the plant. What are you doing? She asked. There was no accusation in her voice, only curiosity. Your Ficus stellaris is struggling, he said, not looking up. It's a plant. Came with the apartment. I water it sometimes. It's not getting the right light. The artificial dawn from the east window is too weak here in this corner. It's getting most of its light from the stronger afternoon simulation, but it's indirect. It's confused. And the soil mixture is wrong for this environment. It's holding too much moisture at the roots while the top dries out. Yuna walked over and stood beside him, looking down at the pathetic plant as if seeing it for the first time. You know about plants? She asked, echoing her question from the garden, but with a different tone. Spent 3 standard years cataloging xenofauna on GL 887, he said, repeating his answer, but then he continued. It was a silicate-based planet. The life was slow. Mostly lichen, some rockworms. Nothing like this. He gestured to the ficus. But you learn the basics. Light, soil, water. All life needs balance. Even on a dead rock, the lichen knew where to grow to catch the sunlight. He stood up and, without asking, carefully picked up the heavy planter. He carried it across the balcony to a spot where the morning light simulator would hit it directly for 2 hours. Here, try this. Water it only when the top 2 centimeters of soil are dry. Not on a schedule. He set the planter down and wiped his hands on his pants. Yuna was watching him, her golden eyes unreadable. 3 years, she said quietly. On one planet. Alone? Mostly. Had a team of 4, but we were spread over different continents. Saw them once a month for supply sync. Mostly it was just me, the rover, and the rocks. He gave a small, dry smile. Sometimes you talk to the rocks. They don't talk back, but it fills the silence. For the first time in Minsu's presence, Yuna laughed. It was a short, real, unguarded sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. It wasn't a graceful, social laugh. It was a burst of genuine amusement. You talk to rocks, she said, the laughter fading into a warm smile. They're good listeners, he shrugged. Then, he dared to ask a question of his own, stepping outside the strict client-contractor lines. And you? Your studies? Mr. Park's file just said, private scholar. The warmth in her face didn't vanish, but it became thoughtful. She looked out at the city lights. Stellar cartography, she said, mapping the subtle gravity waves and dust densities in nebula regions. Not for navigation, just for the map, for knowing what's there. She paused, and her voice dropped, as if sharing a secret. My family calls it a pretty hobby, a useless distraction for a draconian of my standing. Minsu looked at the newly positioned plant, then back at her. On GL 887, I mapped a canyon system so complex, the survey AI gave it a 99% probability of being a dead-end network. No value. I mapped it all anyway. Took 6 weeks. Found a single perfect crystal formation deep inside. No economic value. Just beauty. He met her eyes. I understand pretty hobbies. The air on the balcony was cool, but the silence between them was not. It was full of the shared understanding of people who found meaning in quiet, useless things. The bargain was still there, the money, the contract, the events. But the wall between client and employee had, in that moment, developed a door. And it was standing open. The largest event was a family gathering for Yuna's great aunt's orbital anniversary. It was held in a grand hall within the draconian residential spire. The air shimmered with gentle holographic displays of the honored elder's life. The guests were numerous, all dressed in fine attire, their scales gleaming under the lights. The hum of conversation was a low, polite roar. Minsu felt the weight of the stairs more here than at the gallery. He was the only non-draconian in the room. He was a spot of dull color in a sea of metallic hues and elegant, sweeping forms. He stayed close to Yuna, who moved through her relatives with a practiced, regal grace. She introduced him simply as Minsu, my associate. The reactions were mixed, polite nods, curious glances, a few thinly veiled looks of bemusement. They navigated towards a group near a refreshment table. A tall, middle-aged draconian with sharp features and emerald green scale accents turned as they approached. His eyes swept over Yuna and then settled on Minsu with clear disapproval. "Yuna, I see you've brought your project," the man said. His voice was smooth but carried a sharp edge. Minsu remembered him from Yuna's briefing, a cousin named Taejin, involved in clan logistics. "Taejin," Yuna acknowledged, her voice cool. "It's just fascinating," Taejin continued, not looking at Minsu but speaking about him as if he were an exhibit. "This new trend of keeping human companions, like having a clever pet. Does it perform tricks? Or is it just for decoration?" The two draconians with him offered muted, uncomfortable chuckles. Minsu felt the insult. It was meant to. He stayed still, his face neutral. His role was to be background, to not cause a scene. Yuna's composure tightened. "Minsu is a professional, here under a cultural liaison contract. His presence is not your concern." "Oh, but it is a family concern, cousin," Taejin pressed, his smile widening. "When one of our own seems to require external support for simple social functions, it reflects on us all. Suggests a weakness, an inability to stand on one's own, or perhaps just a cry for attention." He finally let his gaze fall directly on Minsu, dismissive and cold. "Tell me, human, did they have to teach you not to drool on the furniture?" The quiet malice in the words hung in the air. The small group around them had gone still. This was no subtle jab. It was a public stripping away of pretense. Minsu saw it happen. He saw the mask Yuna had worn so perfectly for weeks. The mask of calm, detached nobility, shatter. Not with rage, but with something far worse. Her golden eyes widened, not in anger, but in a flash of pure, raw hurt. The kind of hurt that came from hearing a private, feared truth spoken aloud with cruelty. Her breath hitched. For one terrible, vulnerable second, her shoulders slumped, and she looked young, exposed, and deeply wounded. Then, with a speed that was almost violent, she rebuilt the mask. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears she would never let fall without a word. She turned and walked away, not towards the exit, but towards a side door that led to a private terrace overlooking the city. Taejin looked momentarily surprised, then smug. He had drawn blood. He and his companions drifted away, whispering. Minsu stood alone for a count of 3. The rules of the contract were clear. Stay nearby. Be unobtrusive. Do not engage. He looked at the door Yuna had disappeared through, then at the crowd of staring, murmuring draconians. The simple bargain felt very far away. He followed her. The terrace was dark and cold, the city's glow providing the only light. Yuna stood at the railing, her back to the door, her hands gripping the metal so tightly her knuckles were pale. She didn't turn as he stepped out. "You should not be here," she said. her voice thick but controlled. Go back inside. That is your role. Minsu didn't go back. He walked to the railing and stood beside her, not too close. He didn't look at her. He looked out at the endless city lights, the moving streams of traffic like glowing rivers. My sister, he said, his voice quiet in the vast night, says I run toward lonely places. He paused, choosing his words with the care of a man placing stones on a path. She worries about me. She thinks after all those years in the silent places, I forgot how to come back to the noisy ones. Yuna was silent, rigid beside him. I took this job because the money was good, he continued, but also because the silence in a crowd is different from the silence on a rock. I thought maybe I could remember how to be in it. He finally turned his head to look at her profile, etched against the light. I think maybe you've had a lonely place built around you. Built so well you think it's a palace. But it's still a quiet, empty room. A tremor went through her. She shut her eyes tightly. He was wrong, Minsu said. Not about the insult to himself, but about the core of it. You aren't weak for not wanting to stand in there alone. You don't understand, she whispered, the words barely audible. I understand that I spent 3 years talking to rocks because I forgot what people sounded like, he said, his own voice rough with a truth he hadn't shared with anyone, not even Hannah. I took this job to listen, not just to follow instructions. To listen. He took a slow breath. I am listening now. Yuna opened her eyes. She didn't cry. Draconians of her standing, she had been taught, did not cry. But she leaned forward, her forehead gently touching the cold railing. The proud, perfect posture was gone, replaced by a posture of exhaustion. It is so tiring, she confessed to the city below. The performance, every single day. And the loneliest part is that no one else sees it as a performance. They think it is me. They see the walls and think it is the person. And sometimes, I start to believe them. They stood in the cold, dark silence together. It wasn't the comfortable silence of the balcony or the gallery. This was a heavier, shared silence. The bargain was broken. He was no longer just a paid partner following a script. She was no longer just a client maintaining a facade. They were just two people, on a dark terrace, admitting to the profound loneliness that had brought them together. The transaction had ended. Something else, fragile and real, had begun. The message arrived on both their devices the next morning. It was a simple, polite auto-reminder from the Celadon Partner Agency System. Asterisk contract, YC 7784, concludes in 48 hours. Please confirm termination or initiate renewal terms with Agency Manager Park. Thank you for your business. Asterisk Yuna read it standing in her quiet kitchen. The words felt alien from a different time. The simple bargain they referenced belonged to the person she was before the terrace, before the shared silence, before the man who listened to rocks and saw the structures hidden in things. Minsu read it in his small module. The numbers were clear. The contract was almost up. The good money would stop. He thought of Hannah's tuition already covered. He thought of the empty, silent survey missions that might be next. The thought didn't bring its usual dull acceptance. It brought a tight, restless feeling in his chest. They had one final, minor event that evening, a small, informal music recital. They attended. They performed their roles. But it was different. When Yuna introduced him, she no longer said, "My associate." She simply said, "This is Minsu." And when they stood listening to the music, the space between them was not the space of a client and an employee. It was just space. Afterward, back in her apartment, the formality was gone. They sat in the living area, not at the dining table. Yuna had made tea, a simple, human kind she had ordered. The agency will want an answer, Minsu said, staring into his cup. I know, Yuna replied. The terms would be the same, he said, though the words felt hollow. How could they be the same after what was spoken on the terrace? It would be a renewal, another cycle of events, another gallery, another family dinner, another recital. Yuna's voice was quiet, thoughtful. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the sad little Ficus stellaris, which was already showing a hint of green on a new leaf in its new spot. Performing the same play again and again. Min-Soo nodded slowly. He thought of the deep, silent canyons of GL-887. Beautiful but mapped. Finished. To go back would be just repetition. "I have a proposal," he said, the idea forming as he spoke it. "A different bargain." Yuna looked at him, her golden eyes intent. "The renewal fee," Min-Soo said. "It's substantial. What if we didn't renew the partner contract?" He leaned forward. "What if we used that capital for something else? A joint venture. A business partnership." "A business," Yuna repeated, her brow furrowing slightly. "You said your stellar maps are a pretty hobby. I have survey and cartography certifications that are still valid. We could lease a small, independent scout ship. A Class 2 like an old Starhopper model. The fees for a short-term lease are less than my renewal fee." His words came faster now, the idea taking shape. "We could do freelance mapping. Nebula density checks for private researchers. Asteroid composition surveys for small mining co-ops. The kind of work Big Core ignore. It's not glamorous, but it's real." He stopped, suddenly aware he was describing his own dream, not necessarily hers. It was just a thought, a different way to use the funds. Yuna was silent for a long time. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the traffic lanes. "A ship?" she murmured. "We would be co-owners of the project. Equal partners. You know the theoretical maps. I know the practical survey work. We would be working, not performing." She turned to face him. The vulnerability from the terrace was gone, replaced by a fierce, bright curiosity. "You would do this? With me? Not as a paid companion, but as a partner?" "I would," Min-Soo said, and he knew with absolute certainty it was true. "The contract was for me to be your quiet presence. I think maybe we could both use a quiet presence while we do something that matters. To us." A slow, true smile spread across Yuna's face. It transformed her, not into the serene socialite, but into someone alive with possibility. "No more galleries," she said. "No more family dinners," he agreed. "Just the work, the maps, the stars, and the quiet," he added. The next day, they went together to see Mr. Park. The agency manager listened as Yuna explained they would not be renewing the personal contract. He began to nod, his face professionally neutral, ready to close the file. Then Min-Soo laid out their counterproposal. The withdrawal of the renewal fee to fund a licensed, independent dual-operator scout vessel lease, with a business plan for freelance cartography.mr. Park listened in silence. He looked from Yuna, whose posture was now one of eager determination, not rigid control, to Min-Soo, who spoke with a quiet passion about mineral surveys and nebula gradients. When they finished, Mr. Park leaned back in his chair. A genuine, tired smile broke through his professional mask. "So," he said softly, "the Shield became a partner, and the partner became a business proposal." He shook his head, a look of quiet wonder in his eyes. "I have processed many contracts. This is a first." He tapped his screen. "The agency will facilitate the fund transfer to a dual-signature commercial account. And, for what it's worth from an old man, I wish you good luck. With the maps and with the quiet." They left his office side by side. The air in the station corridor seemed different. It didn't feel like a passageway between engagements anymore. It felt like a launch tunnel. They had a new bargain. Not one of payment for presence, but of shared risk, shared work, and a shared, silent ship waiting for them among the stars. The docking bay was not grand. It was a utilitarian, dusty chamber on the outer ring of the station, where independent operators and small freighters came and went. The air smelled of ozone, cold metal, and engine grease. Sunlight from a massive viewport cut through the gloom, illuminating floating motes of dust that in the center of a landing circle sat their ship. It was an older model, a Starhopper-class scout vessel. Its hull was patched in a few places, and its paint was faded, but its lines were clean and functional. The name, freshly stenciled near the cockpit, read, "Faint Nebula." Minsu stood by the open cargo hatch, checking off items on a tablet. Basic supplies, survey drones, nutrient packs, 2 cases of geological sampling tools. A third case contained Yuna's specialized sensor array for stellar dust analysis. Their combined kit. "You are sure this is everything?" A warm voice called out. Hannah walked up, carrying a small crate of spare data spools. She wore her pilot's jacket, and her eyes were bright. She set the crate down and hugged her brother tightly. "I can't believe you're doing this." "Believe it," Minsu said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. He felt a surge of gratitude. She had taken a detour from her own route to see him off. Hannah pulled back and looked at the ship, then at Yuna, who was performing a final systems check at the external terminal. "So that's her." "That's Yuna," Minsu said, the name feeling natural. Hannah walked over. Yuna turned from the terminal, her expression momentarily uncertain. She was dressed in simple, tough utility clothes, her hair tied back. She looked like a different person from the woman in the formal coat. "You must be Hannah," Yuna said, offering a respectful nod. "Minsu has spoken of you often." "All good things, I hope," Hannah said, smiling. She looked Yuna up and down, not with judgment, but with a pilot's appraisal. "He says you're a crack map maker, that you see things in the noise." "He is generous," Yuna said, but a small, proud smile touched her lips. "Your brother sees the structures in everything. It is a useful skill." Hannah's smile softened. She glanced back at Minsu, who was securing the cargo hatch. She lowered her voice. "He runs toward lonely places. Always has. I was worried this was just another one." She met Yuna's golden eyes. "But I don't think it is this time." "Thank you." Yuna understood. It wasn't thanks for the business deal. It was thanks for seeing Minsu, for hearing him. She nodded, a deep understanding passing between them. "We will take care of the ship and of each other." "That's all I ask," Hannah said. She gave Yuna's arm a quick, friendly squeeze, a very human gesture, before turning back to her brother. "Call when you're in range of a relay, okay? Don't go silent for months like last time." "I promise," Minsu said. With a final wave, Hannah walked back towards the bay elevators, leaving them alone with their ship and the sunlight. The final preparations were complete. They climbed the short ramp into the faint nebula. The interior was compact, all function. 2 acceleration couches side by side in the cockpit, a small living area behind, bunk beds, a compact galley. It was smaller than Yuna's apartment. It felt 1,000 times more full of potential. They strapped into the cockpit seats. The control panels lit up under their hands. Yuna's fingers flew over the NAV console with a natural grace, inputting their first coordinates, a quiet, unmapped sector on the fringe of a minor nebula. Minsu handled power-up sequences and comms, his movements calm and sure. "All systems green," he said. "Ready for undocking clearance." "Clearing now," Yuna replied, her voice focused. A station controller's voice crackled approval in their headsets. With a gentle thrum, the faint nebula lifted from the deck plates. It turned slowly, nosing towards the vast magnetic airlock at the end of the bay. The bright sunlight from the viewport washed over the cockpit, then faded as they passed into the transition tunnel. Then there was only the black, dotted with stars, and the faint, colorful haze of the nebula in the distance. The silence of deep space enveloped the ship. It was a deep, complete quiet, broken only by the low hum of the life support systems. Minsu unstrapped and moved about the small space for a moment. He returned to his seat and placed a small object on the console between them. It was a rock. About the size of his thumb, it was a rough, unremarkable gray, but it had a single, perfect band of white quartz running through it like a vein of light. It was glued to a small metal base, on which were engraved coordinates, GL 887 S7. "A good luck charm," Minsu said, his voice soft in the quiet. "From my first long survey. It's just a rock, but it's a good rock." Yuna reached out and carefully picked it up. She felt its weight, the rough texture, the smooth line of quartz. It was the opposite of everything in her old life. Unpolished, unassuming, and utterly real. It had seen silence. It meant something. She placed it back on the console, right between them. It looked like it belonged there. It's a good rock, she agreed. She input the final course correction. The engines pulsed, a steady, reassuring vibration through the deck. The faint nebula began to accelerate, not with a dramatic leap, but with a patient, purposeful push, carrying them away from the crowded lanes and into the open, silent dark on the console. Their new contract, a joint commercial venture agreement, scrolled on a secondary screen. But neither of them looked at it. They looked ahead, through the cockpit canopy, at the endless stars waiting to be mapped. The simple bargain was far behind them. They were not a client and a companion. They were not two lonely people. They were partners heading into the quiet together with a good rock for company and a whole universe of work that mattered, finally, to them.